Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. Right now, President Biden unmasking new CDC guidance for vaccinated Americans.
Starting today, if you're fully vaccinated and you're outdoors, you need, and not in a big crowd, you no longer need to wear a mask.
So what do New Yorkers think about these new mask guidelines? We hit Central Park to get the reaction.
Better safe than sorry. I believe that people should wear their masks regardless of whether they've been vaccinated or not. I have been vaccinated twice, but as you can see, I'm still wearing my mask, and I'm going to continue to.
And signed, sealed, delivered, the petition to oust California Governor Gavin Newsom officially has enough signatures to trigger a recall. All right, let's start with NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. He's got more on this new guidance from the CDC. So, Mike, talk us through it. What are the new mask guidelines? And what else did the president say about COVID today?
Well, Alison, first we should say it's important to note that this is just guidance. About half the states in this country have already dispensed with any formal mask requirements for their citizens. But it's still an important step for this administration to lay this out. And on what is really the first summer-like day here in Washington, President Biden came out to his backyard to walk us through a little bit of what's going to be changing here, which is that both vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals can go on a run or a jog with members of their own household. They can attend small group gatherings in their backyards without wearing a mask. But then things change for those who are unvaccinated. Fully vaccinated individuals can do other activities, including dining out with friends at restaurants without wearing masks, but unvaccinated individuals still, where this now applies to both in terms of wearing a mask, larger outdoor gatherings like a baseball game, like a concert. Both unvaccinated and vaccinated individuals should be wearing masks. Now, of course, indoor, it's a much different story. Individuals are going to have to continue to wear their masks regardless of whether they're vaccinated. But let's take a listen to what President Biden had to say about where we are at this moment in time in the battle against the virus.
Today, in less than 100 days, more than 67%, two-thirds of our seniors are now fully vaccinated. And more than 80% of our seniors have had at least one shot. That effort has resulted in a drop of 80% in deaths among American seniors, a 70% drop in hospitalizations.
And so this was something of a victory lap from the president, of course, as we head into the 100th day in office. The Herculean task that he outlined in the transition of getting vaccines out and in arms for most Americans is well underway. It was also interesting, the framing from both the president, but also some of his medical team, especially CDC Director Rochelle Walensky. When asked why these guidelines were coming now, Walensky said because they want to encourage more Americans to get vaccinated. We know the supply is no longer an issue. They are now dealing with the fact that the demand isn't what it needs to be to get us to herd immunity, and that's what the White House is focused on right now, Allison.
Mike, the president also signed an executive order today. It raises federal contractors' wages to $15 an hour starting in January. What else does that order do?
Yeah, we've been talking about the effort in Congress to try to make a national minimum wage of $15 an hour. It's unclear if that's something we'll hear from the president in his speech to Congress tomorrow. But for now, he's signing this executive order to do what he can do, which is to mandate that anybody who does business with the federal government must pay their workers $15 an hour. This will take effect in January of 22, has to be implemented by March of 2022. White House officials say this would apply to hundreds of thousands of workers and in those businesses that do business with the government. The current minimum wage for federal contractors is $10, and I want to make sure I had it right, 95 cents, $10.95. And so this is a big jump for those federal workers. But it was already, we're hearing from Republicans that this is an overreach from the president and that this money is going to come from taxpayers in order to pay their workers more.
Mike Memoli does math for us on a Tuesday. I love it. Mike, President Biden's also heading to Philadelphia on Friday. Tell us about that trip.
You don't get more on brand for Joe Biden, who, of course, was famous for riding Amtrak to and from Wilmington and Washington when he was in the Senate, then going to Philadelphia on the 100th day in office to mark the 50th anniversary of Amtrak. This is part of what the White House is calling the Getting America Back on Track tour that he's going to be kicking off after his address to Congress. Philadelphia is such an important part of the Joe Biden story as well. It's where he kicked off his campaign campaign with a big speech last May announcing his candidacy, laying out the themes of his campaign. And this is going to be an important moment for him to continue to sell Americans on the details of the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, the details of which we should be getting more of ahead of the president's speech to Congress tomorrow, Allison.
Mike, I have visions of Friday of Joe Biden in aviators, maybe in a conductor's outfit, stopping for a cheesesteak. Like, this is, as you said, as on brand as it gets.
That's for sure, yeah.
Mike Memley, thanks so much. All right, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar to talk about these new guidelines from the CDC. Dr. Azar, I got to be honest, when I first read the new guidelines, I was even a little confused about what had changed here. I'm guessing I might not have been the only one. Can you just talk us through what can vaccinated Americans do today that they could not or should not have been doing yesterday?
You know, Allison, funny that you say that, because literally about 10 minutes ago, I got on the phone with somebody in our team and I'm like, am I missing something? Because I don't know what's different about, like, it's not popping out at me. And I think, Allison, the reason why is that the two things, and Mike did a great job describing this, the two things that really differ here between vaccinated and unvaccinated folks is that vaccinated people now can attend a small outdoor gathering with fully vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and they can also dine at an outdoor restaurant with friends from multiple households. Allison, my guess is that people have been doing this already, right? And so I think more than anything, rather than, suddenly this is like, carte blanche. If you're vaccinated, you can do whatever you want now. I think this is more, what people have already been doing and giving folks the sense that they're not doing anything wrong by engaging in these activities, if that makes sense.
It sure does. And thank you so much for explaining it that way. Because, I kind of looked at it and I thought, wait a second, I live with my husband. Am I supposed to be wearing a mask if we go for a jog, just the two of us together? Because I wasn't doing that. And I hope I wasn't breaking all the rules. But thank you. It clears up it clears it up quite a bit. I'd like to bring in some sound from CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She said today that basically this is just the first step. Here she is this afternoon.
I know that the quarantine and shutdowns throughout the pandemic have been exhausting. I know that we all miss the things that we used to do before the pandemic, and I know that we all want to get back to doing those things that we love, and soon. Today is another day we can take a step back to the normalcy of before.
Dr. Azar, what would you like to see next for fully vaccinated people? What would be the next natural step or introduction of things that we might be able to do, kind of in the near future?
So to me, it's going to be able to tick off the things on the list of indoor activities, right? The hair salon that you can go to a shopping center, the grocery store, a museum, really things that are indoors that you want to be able to do. Of course, we all want to be able to go to a baseball game or a concert and be in a crowd without always having to wear the mask. And I think what I'm waiting to hear is what parameters they are going to use to make and give us this next guidance. Is it going to be vaccination rates? Is it going to be, surrogate markers of herd immunity? And by that, I mean, we don't have an exact number of people who've have immunity from natural infection. We will, of course, have a real number of people who've been vaccinated. A lot of experts are saying that combination right now probably has us at about 60% immune. So what are we going to use? Are we going to use that hospitalizations are down, case rates are down? Are we going to use that to say we've somehow gotten near that point of herd immunity where we can start to do these things that really will start to resemble normal life? I'm happy that I can do everything. I don't mind wearing the mask, right? Because I know it's protecting me and it's protecting other people. But certainly, I think once we can start doing things without the masks on indoors, it's going to start to feel more and more like normal.
Yeah. That that mask, I should say, rather, is like the security blanket I had when I was a little kid. I don't mind having it on at all. Dr. Azar, just a question for you. And if the answer is I don't know, I totally understand that. I'm having trouble kind of wrapping my brain around what is better or worse. That might not be the right term, but I keep thinking outdoor things are the safer things. But then I think, well, Would the next step be being able to eat inside in a small group or being able to go to a concert or a baseball game in a big group? I'm having a hard time in my brain figuring out which one is a higher risk.
Indoor is always going to be higher risk. And that's the thing. And that's why I think the challenge here. What's that?
Even if it's a smaller crowd?
Even if it's a smaller crowd. And, there was this, I don't know if you caught wind of this MIT study where a professor of chemical engineering and a professor of applied mathematics did this they were calculating the risk of being indoors as a function of, aerosol transmission, ventilation, filtration, really a fascinating thing. And, I think media took it, or people on social media took it to mean that social distancing doesn't matter. That's not true. What they were really talking about is this concept of, these aerosols that are carried in the currents indoors, much like the analogy of cigarette smoke, let's say. So for me, I have to say that indoor activities, especially when people are talking and singing or eating, where they're constantly moving air around, those aerosols, those infectious particles are going to be hanging around there, Allison. And so whether it's a big group or a small group, if there's a lot going on, that's going to be a risk. I still think outdoors, of course, if someone's shouting in your face and they're infected, that jet plume right then and there is going to be those heavy droplets. But generally speaking, those droplets are going to fall to the ground, and the aerosol outside is warmer. Your exhaled air is warmer than the ambient air, and so it is going to rise up. So my vote is still that it's going to be safer to be outdoors at a concert than to be indoors ever eating. But of course, we're going to be eating indoors at some point. I just think that the rate of transmission is going to have to be so low that there just isn't going to be that much virus around.
Dr. Azar, thanks so much for the advice. I'll aim for a baseball game over dinner inside at a restaurant first. Thank you so much.
You bet. Take care.
NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez is in Central Park. Isa, nothing beats spring in Central Park. It's always pretty busy this time of year. What are people there saying about this new mask guidance?
Hey, Allison. So first of all, I want to point out we have been here since before this new mask guidance was shared at the White House press briefing today. And what I did notice, kind of going off of what you just heard Dr. Azar say, is there were several people already here not wearing their masks. So this is something that, a lot of people, when they are walking or biking, doing outdoor activities alone here in Central Park, they were already, not masking themselves when they were doing these activities. However, after the announcement was made, we did talk to several people, both fully vaccinated people who are between shots, and people who haven't been vaccinated yet. And it really varied. Some people have said that they were really following the guidance and wearing their masks every time they were outside. They're breathing a sigh of relief now. And many others saying, even though this guidance is a sign of hope, we're not comfortable yet taking off our masks even outdoors. Take a listen.
I think it's amazing. It's been a long time coming, waiting for this. I have 2 young children. I think it's very, very important for them to be outside and preferably without masks when possible, just so they can be kids and enjoy the freedom.
My concern is that's going to make people think that they can take their masks off when they're outdoors no matter what. I'm glad. I think it's the right answer, but I think people will misinterpret it. And that's dangerous for us.
I think it's definitely long overdue. I'd say since maybe late February, since that everyone's been getting vaccinated. I think people should be walking around without masks, especially here in Central Park.
Well, I'm going to be honest, that's why I'm up here. I cannot wait to take it off and go for a run and feel that little extra bit of freedom. I can't even imagine what it's going to feel like, but I'm really excited just to get out there and take it down.
Allison, I spoke as well with several people who have not yet been vaccinated, and I asked them whether or not this new guidance made them feel more comfortable or, pushed them, acted as an incentive, as health experts are hoping, for them to go get vaccinated. And most of them said to me, you know what, I've made up my mind for now, and this doesn't change that. And yeah, that's what they said. They're waiting for there to be herd immunity, and they, have their beliefs about not getting vaccinated, not feeling comfortable getting vaccinated, and they said this new guidance isn't going to change that right now. Allison?
Issa, Mayor Bill de Blasio says he's leaving it up to New Yorkers to decide if they want to unmask outdoors. Here he is.
I think it will be the choice of each New Yorker what they're more comfortable with outdoor. What we do want to focus on intensely is keeping people in the habit of wearing the masks indoors, at least for the next couple of months. We've talked about June as an important turning point moment. I think people should anticipate keeping those masks on indoors, certainly during May and June, and then we'll reassess from there.
How do people feel about still wearing masks inside, Issa? What are they telling you on that?
Allison, it really depends who you talk to, right? I mean, everyone is comfortable with different levels here when it comes to masking. You know, you heard from a couple of people who told me that even with this new guidance, even, you know, weeks, months after being fully vaccinated, they still don't feel comfortable taking their masks off, even outside, as the CDC is saying is safe to do. So that's on, you know, one side of the spectrum. And then you have, you know, other people who also said to me today that they think it's not only long overdue for you to not have to wear masks, you know, outdoors, that indoors there should also be more freedom. They feel that these restrictions have been in place, particularly here in New York City, for too long, and that those should be lifted now that more people are getting vaccinated. Allison?
All right, Issa Gutierrez in the ever beautiful Central Park. You can't beat Central Park in the spring or fall. Thank you so much. All right, grab your hat, grab your mask, mix a couple of mint juleps. The Kentucky Derby is just a few days away, and fans will be back at Churchill Downs this Saturday to watch the Run for the Roses. NBC News correspondent Cal Perry is at Churchill Downs in Louisville with a preview of what a pandemic derby will look like. Cal, I have always wanted to go to the Kentucky Derby, but a classy gal like me has always settled for a quick trip to the OTB. So tell us what the deal is this Saturday. How many hats are they letting in? What are the COVID rules for the crowd?
Well, let's start with that's a crime and you're an anchor, so you should just come and ask for forgiveness. You're done asking for permission. Just come. We'll have you here. Look, the great thing about this venue, you can fit 170,000 people in here. There are thousands of people here right now, but there's plenty of space to social distance, right? And that's what organizers want to stress to the fans that are coming out. You can fit 170,000 people in here, but there will only be, I can't believe I'm saying only, there will be 50,000 people here on Derby Day on Saturday. For today and every day at the track, when you come to the track, you're met with a very basic medical questionnaire, whether or not you've had symptoms, you've been in contact with someone who has symptoms, and you have your temperature checked. Once you get in here, masks are required, social distancing is required, and they've changed a few things with the attendance. They're going to keep attendance to a minimum, 20% on the infield, 40% on those reserved seats. The big topic of discussion today across the country, indeed here in Kentucky, is about masks. We've been asking people about masks and what it's like to be back at the track. Take a listen.
I'm really sorry that it's a smaller crowd because that's part of the excitement of being at Churchill Downs. And, I mean, everybody has to make money. I think they've got a good safety plan for the first year. And I think that as the variants pass through, we'll know a little bit more about what's going to be safe.
Once we get inside, we'll have to put it in. Hey, as long as we get to be around people, it really doesn't matter.
Is America ready for big sporting events again?
Oh, yes.
The staff is very politely here, very politely in Kentucky fashion, asking people to keep their masks on. Thank you so much. You can see everybody here is very excited to be back. And just a reminder, the Oaks are Friday, the Derby is Saturday, so we should see that crowd peak on Saturday again, around 50,000 people, Alice.
Hey, Cal, the crowds might be small, but the hats are still big. I love it. Cal Perry in Louisville, thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.
Unity. The president made it a campaign promise. So 98 days into the job, is he living up to his commitment to bring the American people together? NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander asked voters in Georgia.
From the kickoff of his campaign.
Yes, unity over division.
To the start of his presidency.
My whole soul is in this, bringing America together.
Joe Biden's cast himself as a voice of unity.
I'll work with Democrats and Republicans.
But 100 days in, the president's signature accomplishment is the only COVID relief bill that attracted no Republican votes. The GOP slamming him for executive orders they say cater to the Democratic base.
We came here to Georgia, a state President Biden flipped blue for the first time in decades by the narrowest of margins. Do the voters here think President Biden's fulfilling his promise to unite Americans?
We met Democrat Shauna Swearington, who's been furloughed as a restaurant server for more than a year, while also supporting her 73-year-old mom.
What was the low point like for you during this pandemic?
I was just sitting there with all of my bills laid out in front of me and trying to figure out how I'm going to pay all of this, how I'm going to get through this.
What does that moment feel like when $1,400 shows up in your checking account?
Woohoo! Yes, I can do something with this. This is tangible.
Republicans opposed the $2 trillion Democratic plan, saying too much of the spending was unrelated to the pandemic. But Swearington credits the president for signing it.
It wasn't just a party that needed that relief. Every American needed that relief.
But what are Republicans saying about the president's performance? Real estate broker Rena Marie Moore is an immigrant and Trump supporter.
Do you feel that he's reached out to Trump voters like you?
No, not quite. We do want to see the success of President Biden, but we're already seeing a crisis on the border. We're already looking at inflation when it comes to our gas prices, and it's off-putting because it's just 100 days, and we're like, well, where is the direction of the country going?
How's President Biden doing?
He's not doing as good as the weather in North Georgia, let's put it like that.
Drew Eccles is a fifth-generation farmer who voted for Trump but has been impressed with President Biden on the pandemic.
There's a lot more confidence out there in vaccines and the direction we're headed with COVID.
Still, he says bipartisanship will be critical.
Can President Biden be successful if he doesn't bring Republicans in?
If he's not bringing Republicans to the table, it's going to be an uphill battle.
Hopes for unity in a still divided America.
Let's check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the latest headlines for us from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison, starting out in D.C., where President Biden is signing an executive order today, raising the federal minimum wage to $15 for federal contractors. Agencies must implement the raise by next March. And it also increases the tipped minimum hourly wage to $15 by 2024. Well, ethnic Karen guerrilla forces in Myanmar say they captured a military base near the border with Thailand. Myanmar jets bombed Karen villages hours later. The Karen National Union is an ethnic minority seeking more freedom from the central government. The capture is seen as a morale boost for those opposing the military coup in the country. Well, as many as 25,000 barrels of the insecticide DDT found off the coast of Southern California. Scientists suspect the massive underwater toxic site dates back to World War II. They estimate between 350 and 700 tons of DDT were dumped in the area. The long-term effects on humans and marine life are still unknown, but it has been linked to cancer in sea lions. And Apple rolling out its new privacy feature called App Tracking Transparency. So this move is part of Apple's promise to curb apps like Facebook that shadow users to improve targeted advertising. So the next time you update your iPhone, even apps you've already installed will probably ask for your consent to track your online habits. And Hamilton creator Lin-Manuel Miranda has a new animated musical hitting Netflix. Vivo follows the adventures of a rainforest honey bear who is voiced by Miranda himself. The movie was supposed to be released in theaters on June 4th, but right now it's unclear as to when we'll be able to watch it at home. But Allison, I can tell you right now, parents all over the country and the world probably are rejoicing because kids love anything Lin-Manuel Miranda touches.
Hey, adults do too. I'm into it. This looks great. Simone, thank you so much. 1.6 million people forcing a recall in California, signing a petition to put Governor Gavin Newsom's future on a ballot before the end of this year. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is in Los Angeles. Steve, I understand those signatures are just one part of the process. So what happens now? And what is the governor saying about all this?
Well, it's a long, drawn-out process, but the immediate, essentially with those signatures meeting the threshold, we're pretty much on the fast track to a recall election come November. A lot of steps along the way, though, the first of which is happening now. These next 30 days are something of a grace period for anybody that signed the petition to get the recall on the ballot. They essentially allow, California does, anybody who wants to withdraw their signature the opportunity to realize essentially what they've done. So they allow for that window. There is a campaign by some Democrats who are pushing for that, because if they meet a threshold, a certain percentage, then they could alleviate the recall in its entirety. Most political analysts looking at this say that's likely not possible at this point, but that's an effort that's being made. Then it goes to the state, who needs to calculate the cost for this recall, which is anywhere between a few million to up to $400 million, and that's for taxpayers. That's a cost that's facing taxpayers as they look at all the campaigning that's going to be going on in the next 7 months. And finally, at the end of all this, there's 60 to 80 days between the Secretary of State and the Lieutenant Governor to sign off on it, so it will officially be on the ballot, where they actually will ask voters whether or not they want to recall Gavin Newsom, and then who they want to put in his place, if that's the option that they go with. Allison?
Yeah, so let's talk about those two questions on the ballot. One, do you want to recall the governor? And two, who do you want to replace the governor with? Caitlyn Jenner already throwing her name in. Who else wants a shot here?
You know, there's a number of, I think, familiar faces from the Republican Party. San Diego Mayor Kevin Falconer is one of the big choices. There's the state representative, Doug Osee. Of course, Caitlyn Jenner. There's also some other ones. There's a porn star, Mary Carey, who ran in the last 2003 election. Yep, she's coming in hot. There's expected to be basically just a parade, a circus, a cavalcade. When we had this in 2003, that's when Gray Davis was recalled. And of course, historically, Arnold Schwarzenegger came in and became governor. There were 135 candidates. And it's important for people in California to remember that no matter what the answer to the first question is, which is, do you want to recall or not, you still have to answer the second question, which is, who would you replace Gavin Newsom with? Any of those people, no matter who it is, if they get more votes than anybody else, they become governor, even if that's not a majority position, even if it's not over 50% vote. So that's very important to know. I think most analysts are looking at the polling, looking at the numbers, looking at Newsom's approval rating, which is still well over 50%. And they're saying this is probably pretty unlikely if it gets to that point. But you still have to think about the X factors. This is California politics. There's a lot of names that are going to come through. If somebody mounts a pretty strong campaign, this could get interesting, especially if one of those people happens to be a Democrat. We haven't seen a big Democratic name on the ballot yet. They don't want to break from the party. But if somebody decides, I need to be a buffer candidate, I need to be somebody that's a fallback in case there's all this Republican pressure and Newsom slips up a few more times between now and November, that could divide the Democratic Party, and it could make things a whole lot more interesting. We will see as the months goes on. But for the next immediate future, it is going to be campaign mode here in the state of California that nobody really expected just a few months ago. Allison?
Yeah. It is a fascinating political situation to watch. Steve Patterson, thank you.
You got it.
They were violent, terrifying, and deadly. The Capitol riots, the most extreme example of the deep political divisions in our country, divisions that are still playing out in the halls of Congress nearly 4 months later. Lawmakers who lived through that attack telling NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell it's made legislating even harder.
The January 6th insurrection changed Capitol Hill, and Congress is still deeply wounded.
To be in the chamber on January 6th felt like a body blow.
Freshman Congressman Jake Auchincloss stepped foot on the House floor for just the second time on January 6th. After the Capitol was cleared that night, he was shocked that 138 Republicans still objected to the Pennsylvania Electoral College count.
Republicans got back into the chamber and again peddled a conspiracy that somehow Joe Biden was not the rightful winner of this election. It sucked the oxygen out of the chamber because truly this was an opportunity to put Constitution and country first, and they did not take it.
It has created long-lasting tensions and a new litmus test of bipartisanship.
Before deciding whether to co-sponsor legislation with a Republican, we always check whether they voted to certify the results or not. I think to represent my district's values, we cannot be forging political partnerships with people who don't recognize Joe Biden as the legitimate winner.
He's not alone. Illinois Democrat Brad Schneider, known for reaching across the aisle, says he won't work with Republicans who don't acknowledge that Joe Biden is president. He has a bill that provides parents who lose a child access to time off work. He dropped Arizona Republican Paul Gosar from co-leading it.
It's a good bill, but I don't know how, given his statements, his positions, and his continuing to traffic in the big lie, I can go to my colleagues and say, support this bill. So we'll find someone else to work with.
The House is more partisan by design. Still, trust is at an all-time low. So did January 6th change how Congress works?
I think so. I think it has bruised the institution. It's made it harder for us to trust each other across the aisle.
September 11th, there was an attack on this country, an almost attack on this Capitol. It seemed to bring the country and the Congress together for at least a little while. January 6th attack hasn't done that. Why do you think that is?
Well, because the attack came from within.
Congressional leadership have been unable to agree on the terms of a commission to study January 6th. Democrats installed metal detectors for members to enter the House floor. But the damage is also impacting the work that doesn't generate headlines, as dozens of bipartisan bills are signed into law each year. Republican Rodney Davis of Illinois, one of the 64 Republicans who voted to certify the election results, says Democrats should do their job. These litmus tests, they're varying degrees. Each office has a different idea. Are they productive?
No, not at all. If we don't put a stop to that, if we don't come together in a bipartisan way, we're failing America.
But Texas Democrat Veronica Escobar said it's not that easy.
There are elements of that party and some people within that party who are my colleagues who represent a very dangerous national security threat. How do I or anybody else ignore that? And what do we do with that? And how do we create a safer environment? And how do we bring each other back to governing? It is really tough. And I wish I had the answer, but it's something that I ask myself every single day.
Some happy endings do exist. Congressman Schneider said he had a very difficult conversation with Georgia Republican Jody Hice, who led the opposition to the Georgia electors.
We talked and he explained his position, and he does recognize Joe Biden as the president.
Musical chairs on Capitol Hill now that the 2020 census numbers are out. Texas, the big winner, picking up 2 House seats, 7 states losing spots, including Democratic strongholds California and New York. Here's NBC News political correspondent Ali Vitale.
Hey, Allison. Yeah, we're finally getting that first data drop from the 2020 census, and 13 states are impacted by this redrawing of the congressional pie. As they divvy it up now, 7 seats are being shifted. You can see them on your screen. 6 states gained seats, 2 in Texas, and then those other 5 that you see on your map all gained 1. And then 7 states lost seats. You can see them there on your screen. I want to draw your attention, though, to New York and the fact that they lost a seat there of representation, because if they had had 89 more people counted as part of their total population, they would have kept it. It just goes to show you why advocates were so vocal about the need for Americans to participate in this census. But it also speaks to the challenges that census workers came up against over the past year as they had been collecting this data, not just during a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, but during a time of wildfires throughout the West, hurricanes throughout the coast, and a summer of civil unrest. I will say census officials and the Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo were clear when they were on the phone with us yesterday releasing this data. They are very confident in these numbers, but nevertheless, some changes happening that are going to be key as we look to the 2022 midterms, and of course, then when it comes to the Electoral College in the 2024 presidential election. In terms of what happens now, though, at some point the maps are going to get redrawn. That's going to happen in time for 2022, but it's definitely not happening yet. In order for that to happen, we have these top line data, but we're going to need to get a lot more in terms of the demographic and in-depth look at where the populations are at now. That's not going to come until later in the summer, even into the fall. We know that this census data has had a lot of delays because of all of the barriers during its collection. And so it's really on a much more deferred timeline right now. But states are basically going to get, at some point in mid-August, all of the raw data. I like to think about that as the cookie dough batter before you start putting putting it actually in the trays and in the oven to bake. Then what's going to happen towards the end of September, states are actually going to get those cookies right out of the oven, the data formatted in a much more user-friendly way so that they can actually start applying it to redrawing their maps. That data, of course, Allison, is apolitical. Numbers don't have a party. But the people in charge of this redistricting process do. Look at states like Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. All of those states are controlled by Republicans, and that's who's going to be controlling their redistricting maps. There's also Colorado and Montana. They're controlled by Democrats. But in a lot of these states, it's going to shake out along party lines, and there's going to be a lot that we're watching for as these states actually start redrawing their maps, because as you know so well, margins in the House are thin. Republicans would like to retake that majority, and it's not going to take more than really a dozen seats for them to do that. These maps are going to have big implications here in Washington and around the country.
In today's bottom line, the stock market loving President Biden so far. The S&P 500 up 24% since Election Day. That performance, the best we have seen since Eisenhower in the 1950s. So what's driving it, and is this winning streak about to run out? CNBC.com finance editor Jeff Cox joins me now. So, Jeff, heading into the election, the markets were pretty hot, even with our struggling economy and the pandemic. So what has been driving them higher since November, and how much of it can we attribute to President Biden at this point?
It's really a story of just money, money, money. There's so much stimulus in the pipeline right now. We've had about $5.3 trillion worth of federal government spending that's come our way since March. We also have the Federal Reserve with its pedal to the metal. We have zero short-term interest rates. The Fed has about doubled the size of its balance sheet now to nearly $8 trillion. So that has really been the impetus that's driven this. The market just loves all of the money coming in. Biden's big responsibility was basically not to screw it up, and he has done that well. As you mentioned, 24%. He really just had to kind of stay the course. The market got a little jolt last week when that news came out about the tax increases for the highest earners, but got over it in a hurry. So it's really the market looks very strong right now. Some trepidation out there from some folks on Wall Street, worried about the potential for a policy mistake, worried about maybe you get too much of a good thing, maybe. We've seen so far in the corporate earnings season, not such a great performance by the market. So a lot of things happening out there. And where we go from here is it's a little bit of an open question, I guess.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, where we go from here, Jeff, because the S&P 500's up 48% in the last year. What are strategists telling you? Are they getting ready for a correction? Because I hate to be the bearer of bad news, right? But we probably are due for one. And is there one thing in particular they think could trigger one besides the president making a policy mistake?
We haven't had a meaningful market pullback in over 200 days right now, which is really a long time. So the point that you make is a good one. I think some of the worry right now is around not so much Biden. There's some concern about the Fed at this point, actually, again, about being a little bit too easy. We saw those CPI numbers, a really strong growth of over 6% increase in the CPI for March with Consumer Price Index. We see it at the grocery store. We see it at the gas pumps. Price increases going around everywhere. We've seen during corporate earnings season, Procter & Gamble talking about raising some of their prices, and companies just kind of struggling with this right now, supply chain issues. The Fed has been very sanguine about the longer term possibility of inflation. And in fact, they're saying they almost don't even care. They're really fixated on getting the economy back to full employment. They're willing to tolerate inflation that could run above 2%. So on Wall Street right now, a little bit of fear that inflation gets too hot, and the Fed, rather than gradually pulling back some of the help that is provided to the economy, might have to just, boom, slam on the brakes all of a sudden, and that could cause a problem somewhere down the road. I think right now, people are fairly confident. But interesting, again, the point I made previously about earnings season so far, corporate profits have been amazing this quarter. Companies are beating to the tune of about 85%. And the market really hasn't moved on it. So that's always a bad sign. When the market doesn't go up on good news, it's always a little bit of an indicator that the rally could be getting old.
Such a good warning. A little fear is a good thing, but we certainly don't want to see everything come crashing down. Jeff, great to have you on today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
E-commerce is booming in the U.S. Warehouses and distribution centers are popping up across the country, delivering some issues to the communities around them. Things like truck traffic and toxic air pollution, especially in California's warehouse hub, an area that's east of Los Angeles. It's known as the Inland Empire. NBC News tech investigations editor Olivia Solon is covering the story. Olivia, you're reporting that Amazon built 19 facilities in the Inland Empire since 2012. Walmart has at least 6 in the area. Tell me about the health issues and problems folks are running into there.
So in short, people are just really struggling to breathe. This area consistently rates as having the worst air quality in the country. And every new warehouse brings hundreds of additional trucks, diesel trucks, coming into the community and spewing fumes near schools and homes. And those fumes are linked to high rates of things like asthma and other respiratory diseases.
So at least one local lawmaker wants a moratorium on the new warehouses in the Inland Empire. What other regulations, what other suggestions are on the table to quite frankly, help people breathe there if the problem you're saying is that the air is just so bad?
Yeah, so there's a local air quality regulator that has a mouthful of a name, the South Coast Air Quality Management District. They're proposing a set of rules that would make large warehouses responsible for emissions generated by the trucks that come to and fro from the warehouses. So under the new rules, they'd be required to switch to low or zero emissions technology. And if they don't comply, they could get fined. There's a vote coming up on this set of rules in early May, but the industry, the warehousing industry, is lobbying pretty hard against it.
So what are Amazon and Walmart saying about what's going on there? Are they trying to help solve the problem? Are they denying it? What's their response been?
So Walmart wouldn't comment for the story that I worked on, but Amazon pointed out that it's created a huge number of jobs in the region. This was a region that didn't have a huge amount of employment before the warehousing industry came. And Amazon's generated, I think it's like 40,000 jobs, which is a large number. The company's also pledged various different kind of climate initiatives. One of them is to eliminate its carbon footprint through offsetting by 2040. And it's rolling out electric delivery trucks to take packages to people's homes, as well as testing a small number of low emissions cargo trucks. But none of that's having much, if any, impact on the air quality in the Inland Empire right now.
All right. I mean, it's a simple thing, right? People need to be able to breathe. Olivia, thanks so much for your reporting today.
Thank you.
Misinformation is a feature of social media, not a bug. An expert telling that to the Senate Judiciary Committee today. Senators on that committee asking execs from Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube how their algorithms drive misinformation and radicalization.
We're being given access to these unbelievably powerful tools that can be used for lots and lots of good. And in most cases, because it's free, there's somebody who would really like to capture our attention, shorten our attention spans, and drive us into often poisonous echo chambers.
NBC News senior media reporter Dylan Byers joins me now. Dylan, before we get into what Senator Sass was saying there, can you just give our viewers the basics to make sure they understand what we're talking about here, the basics of how social media algorithms work?
Yeah, you know, algorithms are a feature of our lives now with almost everything we use. And that's true not just of social media, but of a service like Netflix or a service like Spotify. Basically, the more you engage with content on any one of these platforms, videos, texts, posts, the more that platform is sort of engineering you to see content that it thinks you'll like, content that it thinks you'll be interested in. And so the more you engage with any kind of video, news, social post on any of these platforms, the more you're going to see that is similar to that.
It's such a catch-22 because you'll think, oh, I don't want to click on that crap. And then once you do, it just keeps coming back and back and back. And that's my phone, which is on silent. I don't know how that's happening. We're going to have to figure that one out later. Dylan, let's talk about Senator Sass. That's incredible. I don't know how that happened. Let's talk about Senator Sass, who says that algorithms can drive users to poisonous echo chambers. He asked Twitter's exec today if her company capitalizes on rage. A pretty strong question there. How did she answer that?
Yeah, sure. What she said, first of all, she, like her counterparts at Facebook and Google, denied that. more or less. But what she also said is that, look, part of what Twitter does is it puts the conversation out there in public, and so if you have someone who goes out there with misinformation, you also have a community of people who are going to respond to that. And she basically made it seem like it's a benefit for users to be able to have access, not just obviously to the misinformation, but the misinformation and then the debate that happens around that, and that there's a sort of collective force that trends toward good when you have that debate on full view, and that to silence voices ahead of time, or to have Twitter sort of deem what is acceptable and unacceptable speech without letting that debate play out, would in the long term actually be harmful for speech and for Twitter's users.
Dylan, the Judiciary Committee invited a misinformation expert from Harvard to explain how social media algorithms can lead to radicalization. Here's some of what she said.
Nowhere, of course, is this more prevalent than on YouTube, where any search for conspiracy or white supremacist content using the preferred keywords of the in-group will surface numerous recommendations and even offer up direct engagement with these communities and influencers. You're likely to enter a rabbit hole where extracting yourself from reinforcement algorithms ranges from the difficult to the impossible.
Dylan, we don't see YouTube execs on the Hill all that often. What did they say to that?
Yeah, look, the argument that was put back was essentially that this stuff is hard, right? Monitoring content is hard, and it's usually not easy to draw a very clear line between something that qualifies as misinformation and something that qualifies as opinion. It's not always easy to draw a line between content that is genuinely trying to put forward misinformation and something that is satire. There are areas where, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter can draw hard and fast lines, and where it's easier for them to police content without feeling like they're running afoul of speech, of free speech. But there are many areas where it's not. And I think the point that these policy executives tried to put out there to the lawmakers was, look, this is a lot harder than you think it is. And lawmakers come and they say, why didn't you block that? Why didn't you do better on that? And the answer that you will always get from Silicon Valley is, we are throwing more money and resources and manpower at this than you could possibly imagine. And it's hard, but we're working in the right effort to reduce that content. But all three of them would say there will always be gray area. There will always be areas where they are going to have to continue fighting. And it's not something that they can ever put to bed for good.
Yeah, it sure seems like it's harder than it looks from the outside. Dylan, always love having you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tomorrow, the Supreme Court will consider whether students can be punished for their comments outside the classroom. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savala shows us how a Pennsylvania high school cheerleader's Snapchat rant got us here.
This case started when Brandy Levy didn't make her high school's cheerleading team. She took to Snapchat to express her displeasure, which was an expletive-laced rant about F school, F cheerleading, F softball. You get the idea. Even though these statements were on Snapchat, which self-deletes after a certain period of time, this information got back to the cheerleading coaches, which gave it to the school, and the school disciplined her.
I mean, now looking at it, I don't really have anything bad to say. I was a 14-year-old kid. I was upset. I was angry. Every 14-year-old kid speaks like that at one point.
Now, these statements on Snapchat were made off campus on a weekend, far away from the school. And the issue is, if a school can discipline its students for speech that disrupts activities on campus, how far can the school go? Can it discipline students for speech that happens purely off campus? For the answer to this question, we have to go all the way back to 1969, to the seminal case on this issue, Tinker v. Des Moines. That case involved students who wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. The court essentially held that schools can discipline speech that has a negative effect on campus. And this ruling has pretty much been the case on school speech since 1969. But back in 1969, it was easy to tell whether speech occurred on campus or off campus, because as a person, you were either on campus physically or off campus physically. That line is not just blurred, it's completely gone in an era of the internet, mobile phones, and social media. A posting from home on social media can easily make its way onto campus when another student opens up their laptop. Was the student's speech on Snapchat truly off campus if other students were able to access it on campus? A lot of other federal courts have said, yes, a school can, under certain circumstances, penalize speech that happens off campus by a student. However, in this case, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals totally departed from the other circuit's authority. The Third Circuit essentially said schools cannot discipline speech that occurs off campus, including Ms. Levy's speech on Snapchat. This is exactly the kind of case that makes its way to the Supreme Court, where you have a number of federal courts who go one way on the law and another set of federal courts that go another way. This is called a circuit split, and it's exactly the kind of thing the Supreme Court likes to hear to resolve the inconsistency. In the Levy case, the Supreme Court will probably have to define what exactly is off-campus speech. There's a good argument that any text message, social media posting, or even email has potential on-campus speech effects, even if the student makes that statement from home on the weekend and nowhere near the school.
The solution is not to change the constitutional standard, but to allow schools to develop rules that are targeted at these problems of threats and bullying so that you're not jeopardizing political, religious speech, and just kids like Brandy who are having a bad day and are spouting off, but are not harassing, threatening anybody.
Young students and adults like me shouldn't be punished for them expressing their own feelings and letting others know how they feel.
We've come a long way from Tinker in 1969, from wearing a black armband to protest the Vietnam War, to saying F softball, F school, and F cheerleading. But just because the content of the speech may not be appealing doesn't mean it's not entitled to First Amendment protection. The Supreme Court told us that schools can regulate speech that has a disruptive effect. But for the last 50 years, we've been trying to define what exactly is a disruptive effect on school. In this case, the Supreme Court may resolve once and for all whether schools can punish off-campus speech, whether you're wearing a black armband to protest a war or just saying F cheerleading.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.